All right, we got 15. I'm going to wait 1 or 2 more minutes. If anyone has any just general questions before I get into sort of content for today, feel free to place them in the chat. If there's anything quick I can go over in the beginning, I'm more than happy to. And then any clarifying questions, and then we'll jump right into it. Yeah, so Kim, you had a question there real quick. Curious your thoughts on ease and accuracy of importing Revit files. So you may have SketchUp Pro, which is the $399 version of SketchUp. There's a higher up version called SketchUp Studio. That, and actually SketchUp is changing their pro tier ones a little bit. Yeah, so the old version was called SketchUp Studio. I think this is changing in the offerings that they have. Right, so some users don't use V-Ray, but part of SketchUp Studio is Revit Importer. So you can natively import Revit files. The old way I used to do this is exporting the Revit file as a DWG and then importing the DWG. You lose a lot of information in that. So the native import is truly a one-to-one. So it couldn't be easier because it just feels like you're opening the Revit file inside of SketchUp to that extent. So definitely take a look at your license and that sort of offering there. So welcome everybody. My name is Dan Brown. Thanks for joining me all here today to this free guided training that we're going to go over for the next hour. I'll go through sort of agenda and expectations for today, but just as a headline here, this is what I'm referring to as the SketchUp reset, or the SketchUp workflow reset. So I want to join me along this sort of route for the next hour and kind of look at how we can potentially build a repeatable process and how we start and organize and think about our presentations or think about our workflow and how we're using SketchUp. I do see some familiar faces and names in the chat. Some of you already know my background, but if you don't, I'm Daniel Brown. I've been the owner of SketchUp Trainer for the last 15, 16 years. It's in architecture, and I also teach a university and college course outside of Philadelphia, where I'm from. Most recently, I'm a developer of a SketchUp extension, specifically AI Enhance, which you can all go download on the extension warehouse as well. I've been really fortunate over the course of my career to work with a lot of different clients, some of which you might be one of these here. What's really great about SketchUp is you all that are on this call or listening to this recording, you all come from very diverse backgrounds: architecture, interior design, landscape, event planning, set design work, curators for art galleries, woodworkers. What's so amazing about SketchUp is, regardless of what you're doing, SketchUp's a very intuitive way to build and create in a 3D modeling environment. So for me, it's been the way my brain now just thinks in terms of the way SketchUp wants me to build. But today, really, it's a reset. I'm thinking of today, this session, as a reset, not really a race. And what I want you to come away with is just a simple way that you can map out and make your SketchUp process more repeatable. So some of you might be beginners from the questionnaire that I submitted for this. Some of you may be beginners, some are a little bit more intermediate advanced, but regardless, where you are in your SketchUp journey, these principles, these 3 main principles, I want you to really think about as you build and where you are within your foundation. So these 3 main principles I want to kind of address today are starting clean, staying organized, and presenting with purpose. And I'll get into each one of these specifically, as well as give you a demo in how you can actually start to apply this and then move on from there. But basically, starting clean is about beginning each project with some type of intention or decision that can make those later decisions easier. Organized is where all the sort of work is, right? You want to use groups, components, tags, scenes, styles, all of those things to really keep your file organized and controlled. And most importantly, your presentation, you should always know what that purpose is. And sometimes it's easy to assume what those are, but planning out what is the deliverable earlier on really helps you dictate what you want to build and want to create. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of you on here that are different, various skill sets. So regardless of where you're at, I really want you to put this lens on, put this framework on. That way, as you begin building a project or even try to fix or adjust a project, you're thinking in this mentality. Because for you new users, you want a reliable starting point so it doesn't feel like a project is too big to create. And then for the experienced and in between users, you want to be able to just replicate that workflow for the next project and the next piece. So today's really not, I'm not going to do a step-by-step follow along sort of class here. I'm not going to show specific tools and tips and tricks. I really want to guide you through a methodology and sort of a way to evaluate your process and make you think about the way that you're processing your creation of SketchUp models, or even just where SketchUp fits within that design file or within that presentation. So again, that central shift is not thinking of SketchUp in context of tools and commands and tips and tricks. It's really thinking about where SketchUp fits in the overall workflow and the sequence of that. And how can I scale that? How can I make this efficient so that every time I'm doing, say, a landscape design project, I have my library of plants, I have my CAD sort of layers or tags that I constantly use, I have my scenes set up. So thinking and building through that shift, it's not really a better workflow makes the tools more useful. It's not the tools that make the workflow useful. So the better we can understand our workflow and how it should go and move, the just more efficient and the less friction that we'll have in our model. So again, because the model itself is not the destination, right? The model is not the deliverable. Sometimes the 3D model is the deliverable, but in a lot of cases, the work or the presentation is really the deliverable. Again, as we go through these sort of 3 steps of starting clean, staying organized, and present with purpose, we'll go through and I'll explain to you where intention is and how that can build momentum, where and how to structure your files, and then thinking clearly about what we want to communicate. I want you to think about starting clean. And for me, this is always tricky because I work on a lot of different projects in a lot of different industries, and I'm always thinking about the end goal, but I'm not thinking about how to start and where to begin. And a lot of times it feels overwhelming, or I tend to want to put everything in that single file. So if I can take a step back and just truly ground myself and sit and think, okay, what's really the intent right now for this model and where does it need to go? It helps me decide better on how I should actually execute the model and how I can actually build it. Because every time I start a project or a SketchUp model, it's usually a request. It's usually either it's a direct client that I have, or I'm working as a consultant for another designer. So I always ask myself these 3 things. What is the purpose? Who's the audience? And what is the deliverable, or what is the output? Because if I can answer those in the kickoff meeting, then I know exactly what I need to build. It's not, oh, here's the CAD file and now build this house. No, what's the purpose of the model? Is it interior? Is it exterior? Is it going to gradually be both? Is the audience just internal? Is it just to the architect to figure out internally what decisions need to be? Or is it external? Is it sharing just a couple renderings or views? Models tend to have different purposes, and those purposes usually are dictated sometimes by that audience. And then ultimately, where time can be sensitive is the output, right? Is this just a model? Is it an image? Do I have to render it? Do I have to make it photoreal? Do I have to bring it into Photoshop? Do I need to send it to layout to create dimensions and annotations? So all of that, these 3 main things for starting clean, if I have a general foundation and sort of understanding of those 3, it makes starting that project a lot less friction. It gives me the ability to be clear about what the expectation is for those clients. Because a lot of times otherwise, I'll start a model, I'll be energetic to start a project, I get all the deliverables from the client, and I'll just start modeling, right? I'll just bring in the CAD file, build up some walls, create some doors and windows, and before you know it, a day goes by and I have a model built, but it's not necessarily what is needed for that deliverable. So a lot of times I'm over modeling or sort of overbuilding because I wasn't clear of what that workflow or outcome needed to be. So if you can make those decisions to start clean, you can really build with those outputs in mind. You know the structure of the model then, because the way you need to build it is based off of those deliverables, and it just makes it a little bit easier from then and there. Part 2 of this is about staying organized. So, modeling with geometry in SketchUp, if you're working quick and loose, you then spend a lot of time cleaning up at the end. And I'm guilty of this in a lot of little projects, and fighting that urge and really trying to organize sooner really saves you time later on. Don't create tags at the end. Preemptively have a template of your tags, or create styles and scenes preemptively as part of your template. That way you don't have to do this over and over again. Because getting your model organized is visually like a ladder here. We tend to start drawing faces and edges first with rectangle and line tool or from existing geometry. And then as we organize this, most people stay in this sort of groups and components area, which is really good. But where users tend to not expand as much or spend as much time or do maybe later in the process is tags, aka layers, and scenes, aka views. And the key here is these build on each other. You create geometry, you at a minimum create groups to isolate geometry, that way they're not sticky to other. You then convert groups to components so that components act as cloned objects. But ultimately, tags can help you organize stuff that you need to see that's either visible or hidden. It allows you to show different design options within the same file. That way you're not having to save over new files and new positions. And then ultimately, scenes allow us to focus what we need to build on that specific camera view, or potentially for exporting for layout and other various sort of uses. And where I think many users don't have clarity, I think many users look at scenes specifically just as screenshots. And you should remember or know that when you create a scene in SketchUp, it is more than just the camera location of your model. It's more than just a screenshot. It is the style of that particular scene, the sun settings, the axes. So you can use scenes to save drawing axes. That way, if you have a model that's not positioned to model north, you can draw in those various axes. Tags are scene specific. So you can turn tags on and off for specific scenes. And then ultimately too, a lot of you may use layout for documentation, and scenes are imperative to build any good layout documents. The more and clearer your scenes are in SketchUp, the less work you have to then spend in layout. One thing that I didn't put here is scenes can actually work without or disabling some of these settings. For example, you can use a scene without camera location. So you can orbit around in a model and then be able to swap views on and off or turn stuff on and off without having the camera position move on you. So this is really good showing alternates of a project or different design options. So when you plan these out earlier, your presentation can really become less of a scramble at the end, right? You don't want to create all your scenes an hour before your deadline. If you intentionally create your scenes as a template before, or in those early on stages where you're starting to think about those deliverables, it then makes you more focused on the end products and the process that you need to follow from there. So that leads to the third part of this, which I'm calling present with purpose. This is where, okay, you started clean, you organized your model well, but now what are we trying to communicate? And the earlier we can figure that out, certainly the better. But part of that, and I always ask my clients specifically in the age of AI and rendering, I'm always asking clients, what's our deliverable? Sometimes it might be a fixed project where it's, okay, you get 2 renderings, a round of revisions. Other times it's, here's the model, we'll walk through it together. But if I know from the get-go the deliverable, it's totally going to change the way in which I build. Because for certain projects, I may only need to build a little bit to really get a lot out of it, or to make a decision at a specific moment in a project. And I'm going to walk you through this on a real project I've been working on the last 2 weeks and explain to you, it's actually this model here that you see on the right. But I'm going to show you here the way in which I'm using starting clean, staying organizing, and present with purpose as a shift in the way that I'm thinking about projects, because A, I've saved a lot of time, and B, we actually made decisions about the project because of this. So yeah, let's see this in action here, and I'll go through this for you. I'm going to be mindful of time, so I want to make sure that I leave enough time at the end for Q&A here. So if you do have questions throughout, feel free to throw them in the chat there. I have that up on my other screen here. But what I want to quickly demo for the next 15 minutes is this process of starting clean, staying organized, and then present with purpose. So here's a house I'm working on. My job from the architect is this client wants to add a second property to their house, and we're getting hit with fees. So we're trying to scale back the original sort of design into a smaller footprint just because the budget is getting out of place. And we have 2 different schemes. One's a 2-story scheme and the other's a smaller down sort of 1-story scheme. So my starting point is a CAD file, and CAD files in themselves can be messy. So staying organized early on is a huge benefit, because if we aren't clean right away, then it just leads to errors later. So in this, for example, under options, I always flatten my line work, merge coplanar, orient faces consistently. Sometimes I'll preserve drawing origin depending on the project. This is a new feature in 2026, import layers as groups, but I ignore that because I don't need them isolated in that sense. But the first thing I do with this is I'll import the CAD file so that we can see what we're working with. And you can see right now it opens me up to this really wide sort of screen. There's probably some kind of CAD artifact way out here somewhere, which is why it's zooming me out. So you can see that sort of instance. So the first thing I usually do with a CAD file to start this clean is I take all of these tags or layers from AutoCAD. Oops, got to be able to select all of them. There we go. I'll create a tag folder and just call this CAD Import. And that way it's all contained into one sort of file here. This comes in as a component, so I tend to explode this just so that I can actually use the geometry. And then as the zoom extends, I'll just zoom out farther because there's some random little artifact over there. So I'll do a Control A, unselect this, hit delete, and that usually cleans up a little bit of that extra kind of geometry. There's still some stuff residual here, but now we're talking. The other thing is I turn off profile edges with CAD line work because CAD line work gets to be pretty heavy. And then from here, remember what's the intent. So this client, they need to understand, they can read the floor plan and understand logistically what it is in plan. What they're having a hard time doing, and what my task is right now, is they need to just see a volume of the exterior of this house. So for me, I want to resist the urge to build a detailed interior model. I know we might get to there if this is the scheme that's chosen, but it's not the intent for right now. The intent right now is I need to basically take the elevations, rotate them 90 degrees, and drape it onto a Monopoly style like massing model. So if I stay true to that and keep that in the sort of background, it makes my intent much easier on what I need to build. So I'll take for example, I'll take the floor plan that I need and group it. I'll take the elevation that I need and group them, just using a keyboard shortcut to group them. And then everything else I don't need. So everything else I'm just going to delete. And then I always like modeling close to the origin point. So I'm going to bring this closer to the origin point. And this project has a certain fixed point, which is going to be this corner right here. This is really the starting point for the model. Technically it's that side, but that's okay. So again, intent of this model, we want just an exterior massing of this. So this is grouped. I'm going to take this CAD plan and I can turn off all of the CAD this way here. But what I usually like doing is the internal geometry has its own tag. I usually like to add another tag outside here and just call it CAD plan and do another one called CAD elevation. That way I'm tagging this to that specific one, which is going to be right there. And then the elevations, I can turn the elevation there. That way I have more control over the individual groups. And then globally, I can turn them all off. So tags can be tricky because objects can have multiple tags. Because if they're nested, the nested object has the tag that it's assigned to. So I'll take these, I'll rotate them up, and then I usually move them much closer, and then start rotating these, right? So I'm going to rotate this 90, move it over, rotate these 90. So you get the idea. From here, just for time purposes, I would move these all up and tight to the building. But from this single elevation, I can pretty much see what I need to build here. Other thing I like to do, all the CAD geometry is on here. So like line siding and depth points, right? I can go into the tags here and just turn off line siding, find the depth points as well, just somewhere right there. So now much easier to see. I usually like also just drawing generally a ground to have. And then I'll group that as well because I don't want to draw on top of it and have other geometry interfere with it. Okay, so now intent, right? The intent is just to build a massing of this. I'll start with just a little box here and I'll use the CAD geometry as a reference to build out this house here. Because this is symmetrical, I usually like to break that apart. And now I can get something like this. Might turn back edges on and get something like that there. Now the other thing is this is an interesting house where that's 1610 and this should be 1610 as well, which the CAD is off a little bit. So I'm just going to fix it slightly there. And then I'm going to do a very basic roof pitch just for today. that changes this a little bit, but just so you can see this. All right, so I'm going to take these two edges and I'm going to move it up to the inside edge of this point right here, which is about 8 feet 1 inches, give or take, something like that. So this might be enough to start to give the client an understanding of the massing, but this isn't completely accurate. What I may need to do is organize this a little bit better. So I'm going to take the roof now that I have, and I'm going to group that, and I'm going to organize as I'm planning here. So I'm going to add a new tag. The tag here, because I have all this CAD information and I don't want to lose, a little trick I do is I put a little space bar. So literally hit the space bar before, and then I type in roof, because in the dropdown, it will usually, oh, of course it didn't do it here. Let me try that again. Used to be able to do that in 2025. I guess you can't do it in 2026. So another option is to do dash roof or 0 roof. If I put a 0 before it, it alphabetizes it, so it puts it first. And the reason I would do that is when I go to tags, I don't want to have to search through all these tags. I can just see all the way up at the top is my top one there. Now, the other thing with working smart and working fast here, certainly there's a lot of extensions you can take a look at. This project specifically, I think it breaks in here and it breaks in here. And then these roof pitches extend out at a different height. But let's just say for today that these are all sort of same width, same height. What I can do is I can take all of these surfaces, all of these faces, and there's a great tool called Fredo joint push pull. So I can basically joint push pull this vertically. There we go. Let me pre-select these again. I can bring these up, let's say 8 inches, and then there's an overhang. So there's probably about a 12-inch overhang. So I can select this, and now it's going to start pushing this face out 12 inches, or maybe it's these two. I can take these two pieces, do F, and it's continuing that. Now this might create a little bit of an error. So sometimes extensions don't always work exactly how we want. That's a little bit better. So we can do 12, but then I'd have to leverage this down. That way it's all one piece. You start to get the idea. In the end, I'll speed forward in time. In the end, for this project in this house, I got to the point where I had the massing model. Let me turn off the elevation. I had the massing model set. And I was like, okay, now I need to do doors and windows. But remember, we don't have to do any of the interior of this. And if I don't have to do any of the interior, then I'm going to cheat. Or I'm going to represent the exterior, and that work's already been done, right? In the CAD file, let me just bring it back so you can see what this looked like before. In the CAD file, the doors and windows are there. So what I did here is I'm like, okay, I need to just project or position the CAD doors and windows so that they're literally on the surface. So if I enter the group that I created of the elevation, I'll then select my windows and my door. I'll make sure I don't select everything. And I'll make this a group. And then I'll cut that group, close out of this elevation, hide the elevation. and now I'll paste it in place. And this group then, it's positioned correctly. It just needs to move in the green and lock into that place. So now in terms of a deliverable, if I now create, let's show it from this side because this side has the pool. There you go. So as a deliverable, we're now much closer to where we need to be for this client to really understand how this space functions from walking, what we're seeing on this side of the house, what's on the more private side, or the sort of the back side of the house with the deck and another little side deck here. So this is enough for us to take it and to position it. But it doesn't stop there, because remember, I want to think about how am I preparing to present this. So in some cases, this might be the model, and I might just give this to the client and maybe share it on Trimble Connect or share a Dropbox link so they can download it. Or if I'm doing a webinar presentation with them, that might be enough. But the alternative is I still want to create scenes. That way I know what I've shown the client previously and help anticipate what I need to add or show from there. So native SketchUp tools at this level where it's schematic, I might do a sketchy edge or sketchy style, but I may also use some other tools. For example, as I mentioned earlier, developed extension called AI Enhance. So here you can launch this as a view and then render this out. And again, just for time purposes, I'll just show you what one of those sort of look like instead of running through this. But basically you can take that SketchUp view without having to draw the doors and windows, it's rendering that for me. Or if you're early on and you need something more stylistic, right? I have a lot of clients that I'm going back to doing more of the hand illustration feel where it doesn't feel permanent, it doesn't feel perfect, right? There's room for change. There's room for interpretation, I should say. You're bringing them along that path. So this is where usually some of my presentation work goes from there. Ultimately too, if it's for internal stuff, I might create scenes then for my elevations, which we already have these elevations in CAD, but I can use these elevations to maybe double check our CAD and to make sure things that need to be corrected. For example, there's a detail here that was hard to understand of what we wanted to do with that roof pitch. It might need to come in and be something more like that. And those were decisions that are found out, not in plan and elevation, but once you bring that into 3D, you start to see some of that. So that's a bit of a demo in putting these three main points into place, which again, starting clean, staying organized, and presenting with purpose. Next steps for you, if you are interested in learning processes like this and workflows like this, I'm starting a cohort in July. So this is a fresh new training for me to do where we're calling this SketchUp Workflow Studio. So it's a cohort where every week we meet in a 60-minute live session and go over and meet users where they're at in their workflow and basically build them up into a repeatable process from the start to the finish. So whether you're a beginner or intermediate user and trying to get the most out of SketchUp, this is a way to dive deep into learning SketchUp with me and with the others attending this cohort. So again, that starts in July. If you're signing up for this webinar, you'll get an email from me with this recording, but also we're offering a $100 credit off of the studio cohort here. And yeah, I'll pause here for a second and just open it up to general questions that you might have. Yep. So the studio, so it looks like some users had, and I put a link to it in the chat. The studio class is $9.95, and then with the $100 credit, it would drop that down to $8.95. Oh, how many hours? So I'll pull up the. So this is the page for it. I'll put a link to this in the chat as well. So the way this works is each week we meet for an hour. However, I typically intend users to, there'll be self-paced content throughout each sort of week. So part of my training is doing what I call the frame method, where we're starting from foundations to repeatable workflows to approval views, and then revisions or managing revisions, I should say, and then exporting delivery. So part of this 4-month cohort is going through that process and that framework, literally, no pun intended, to understand and build your SketchUp workflow within that. But then part of that, the first 3 months are about setting up what type of work you're doing, where your workflow is, and building that. The last month is really about, okay, executing it and then refining it. You also get 2 90-minute one-on-one sessions with me. So some of that might be early on as a help for a specific project or really detailed in a part of that. And others might just be clarity of a part that you're stuck in. Sabrina, you asked, can you begin with layout and then do a 3D SketchUp model later? So yes, technically, I don't recommend it. Layout is improving as a 2D drawing tool, but I find it much easier to still draw in SketchUp in 2D than I do to draw in layout in 2D. The main reason for it is in layout, you're always drawing, it's like an AutoCAD if you're drawing in paper space instead of model space. In AutoCAD, you typically always want to draw in model space and not in paper space. And I would say the same thing is still for SketchUp. SketchUp is the model space. You still want to draw in 2D there versus layout. What is the best workflow to present alternative designs for the same space? The best workflow is to group your geometry. So group the objects that you want to show as variations, and then use tags to assign those groups to tags, and then ultimately use scenes to turn those on and off. So I would take this, let's say this whole kitchen needed to flip. So I would group the whole kitchen. I would tag it. Let's call it 1. Let's tag it to 1. Let's copy it. Let's paste it in place. Add another tag and call it 2. And the second copy, we'll call it 2. And then I'll flip this. And this literally happened for this project where this client was thinking about flipping the entire kitchen. But basically, you can turn both of the tags off, and then you would turn one on. That way you can swap between the two. It's a little bit easier for furniture layout. When you have to start moving like walls and pieces, you may have to re-evaluate the way that you do your groups, or you may need to regroup them too. Please email me the link plus other social media contact. Yes. So I will, after this call, anyone that registered for this will get an email link to all of this as well. So Kim wrote, so the deliverable was comparing the 2 versions of the home. So your next step would be to build the other one and then put them both in the green landscape, then showed the demo to the client. Absolutely. You're right on track. Part of what I'm going to do next, which I haven't done on this project yet, is to take this model, which we're calling Scheme 2, and embed it into the other file. So because I'm building it as a separate SketchUp file, I can insert or import any SketchUp model as a component. So I can come into, I think it's render. Yep. I can select my second file and import it wherever that origin point is, the cursor. And then I'm gonna, let's see, I think this way is the position because the front has not changed. There is where that would go. And then to answer back our other questions about options, right? I would maybe create a tag and call the old one scheme 1 and now this new one scheme 2. Because the approval we need first is, do we like the size and shape and positioning of the house? And if the answer is yes, then it's okay. To reinforce that, it's answering some of your concerns about sightline views and what that will look like from the entry and what it opens a can of worms of other questions. But yeah, you're right on in that assumption. And then I think you said, is it appropriate to have a project in mind for this workflow class? Yeah, absolutely. I work always best with a project in mind, whether it's a project I previously did and want to redo and learn from, or if it's a project that I can certainly bill some of the training and work that I'm doing to the client. That's always a double win. Someone's located in DC, are there local groups or SketchUp, and how can I connect to them? Not sure in DC. There was someone for a while that was an architect that was doing some SketchUp training in DC, but generally you could go on the SketchUp's forum site for that. That usually is a good location, but certainly email me afterwards. I don't know of any user meetups in SketchUp specifically. Tuition is USD, correct? Yep, I am based in Philadelphia in US, so yeah. And then student versions of SketchUp. So if you have questions about student access or versions, in the US, the authorized reseller for SketchUp, so to purchase SketchUp for an educational or teacher license or even a nonprofit, would be Creation Engine. They're the official reseller of SketchUp for EDU license. And then there was a question, to be clear, was 16-hour class for $800 just to verify. Yeah, so it's $995 is the original sort of rate, and that includes 4 months of content. So what you can, for some of you that are SketchUpTrainer.com members, what I'll show you as a previous one. When you click on My Library, and you go into the back end of the site, what you'll see is your access. So this doesn't look like yours right now because I'm admin. I'm seeing all of the things here, but just as an example to show a recent cohort, if I take, for example, let me scroll down. Yeah, I can do this one here. So if I look at a cohort that I did for SketchUp 101. So this was just a 4-week session, but part of the SketchUp Workflow Studio is each week we'll have dedicated videos and content to watch and review. And then you'll have access then to recordings of the live session. So of the live session, that will be more of a sort of Q&A and process of where we're at and where we want to build together. But then in addition to that, weekly, we're dripping content and information. So it'll be more than just a couple of videos here. It'll be weekly. There'll be a little bit of homework to how to apply it and build. And again, we follow that frame foundation, so our frame workflow. So the first month is really about SketchUp habits. And then we progress into organizing and controlling geometry. creating your deliverable views, looking through layout, and then how that applies directly to everything else. Is it appropriate for us to have a project we're working on actively to iterate on during the class? Absolutely. I would encourage everyone to have a project in mind, because for me, the best way to learn is to apply it directly to a project versus me making up a generic sort of problem. And your design problem might be much different than someone else, right? Someone on the cohort might be an architect, you might be an interior designer. You are both building spaces, but your need for the model is going to be slightly different. The application of the techniques and the workflow is similar, but then how you are applying it can change a little bit. And then Heather had a question about deciding whether to do the training in August or would the cohort be just as applicable. Personally, as live training for me is my favorite way of teaching, in-person live training. I do believe, though, that live class in August we may or may not hold because of enrollment. It's been harder since COVID to get people in person for 2 days. So I would say your best bet would actually be the cohort to get the weekly sort of engagement versus throwing all of it in 2 days. And that's also just a shift that I'm dealing with in terms of leveraging training and instruction, right? The 2-day workshops and even the month webinar, they're great at getting in for that specific, I need to get started or I need to understand what I don't know. The point of this workflow studio is to go beyond that and really, by 4 months, here's your workflow, here's how you're using SketchUp, and you just have to now rinse and repeat it every time you're starting a project, because it's enough time to actually get deeper into the challenges, the friction within projects to truly figure out what those steps are to mediate and resolve. And certainly you all have my email address. I'll put it in the chat here as well, just in case you need it. But again, if you have any questions about any of the trainings or offering or services that I provide here, please reach out. And then, yeah, hope you enjoyed the session here, and I'll send this as a recording after our call here. And I'll stick on here for a couple more minutes if anyone else has any last minute questions, but thank you all. And yeah, enjoy summer. At least for us, it's the last day of school for my son. It's the official start of summer, I feel like. Oh, yeah, good question, Heather. I have done trainings in Toronto pre-COVID. So yeah, I definitely have an interest. It's just more logistical challenge than anything else. And then there's a question about support access afterwards. Yeah, so one of the things that so I have 2 main offerings. Let me just share my screen real quick so that you can see that. Yeah, so you get access beyond the 4 months. You get access to all of my training, all the recordings that like a Learning Pass member would for the rest of that sort of year. So till June is basically a full calendar year. So that you wouldn't get the weekly cohort calls anymore, like those sort of end. But then to continue the training and to continue the support, you get the training content to refresh on any courses or specific tutorials that you wanted to watch and see. And then someone wrote, they're beginners, so what would I learn from the 4 months with some minimal experience? So yeah, that's honestly, the beginners is great because we'll start from the ground up. So instead of importing a CAD file and starting from that, it might be, let's model this site plan or this location we're trying to build something and do general massing, model, and study from. So in that, you're going to learn, okay, I need to create groups for different facades. I need to potentially show input of where things might position. I need to know where my setbacks are. Whatever those sort of parameters might be, that's where a lot of that can leverage. And the Cohort group should be a small group, so I'm capping it, I believe, at 8 users. Also just understanding where users are, and a lot of this as an initial sort of release is dictated on the members that join. I might introduce more, if it's more architecture leading, I might lean into that a little bit more. If it's more interior, I've dabbled in so much of it over so many years, so it's easy to go in and out. Does it include lessons on how to employ V-Ray and Enscape enhancements? I do have, so I don't typically use V-Ray. Most of the work that I've done has been Enscape. So I've trained and was an Enscape reseller all of last year. So I would typically show Enscape for that. But to be quite honest and full disclosure, I don't render in either right now because I developed an extension for SketchUp to render using AI right inside of SketchUp. So what I found is the deliverables I can do in much less time with much less input and produce a better quality image that still respects the model and the fidelity of our project. Does SketchUp's new version now produce photorealistic renderings minus the plugins that I mentioned? Or minus the Enscape? Yes. So let me share screen. I think you can see my screen. Yeah. So SketchUp has, so if you go into the extend, you still have to download this. SketchUp has what's called AI render. So if I go into extension, click on extension warehouse, although they are changing how it's free right now, but there is a limit to the number of tokens that you get or credits that you get. So AI render is SketchUp's official AI rendering tool so that you don't have to use V-Ray or Enscape or D5, Twinmotion, any of those. My personal opinion to AI render is that it's garbage, meaning like copying and pasting your image and bringing it into Gemini. Yes, it can create a pretty AI generated image, but it typically drifts a lot from the final image, meaning it makes up stuff. So that's essentially why I built AI Enhance, which is my own extension that you can download from the extension warehouse. And what I've prided in the development of it is how much it actually respects sort of the model, which I can show an example. Yeah, this could be a good one. Yeah, you can see base SketchUp image. Although I forgot to put the roof on, so that was my fault. It wasn't AI's fault. Did add a cutting board and a plant here, but you get the idea. So there's less model drift between real and accurate. And then more importantly, a lot of the work that I'm doing, so much of AI has been around like creating photorealism, but most of my clients right now are not doing super photoreal. I'm still going back to traditional architecture renderings where renderings are more stylistic. Cost of AI Enhance, it depends on the number. So I didn't want to do this subscription based. So I did it as a credit based. So for every rendering, it can cost anywhere between 20 cents and 26 or 25 cents, which is basically covering the API costs. So using the learning language models that are actually producing the AI image itself. Do AI renders, are they done in cloud space or do they need dedicated graphics card? So that's the huge benefit of AI renderings right now. It's not dedicated on your graphics card. What you're seeing right here, for example, is when I hit enhance, the computer is not rendering this. It is being sent to the API, The API is serving over the internet, telling it to produce image based off of prompt, and then it's coming back. So that's a huge benefit in AI renderings, regardless of what you use, whether it's mine or other tools, is if you don't have a powerful enough graphics card to use D5 and Enscape and V-Ray, then AI tools are much more forgiving in that. And then how fast are AI renderings compared to Enscape? For example, how long is one frame of a kitchen view? That's a hard question to answer because it's time based off of how much input you need to do to make the model look realistic. So sometimes in Enscape, I can just open a file and the presets that I've dialed in, so like I have courses on SketchUp Trainer of setting in your presets for Enscape. If I can dial in a preset for Enscape, it doesn't take much time to set that up. But to do truly photoreal and get to the caliber of sort of other tools, it takes time. So what I found in the last year is the time to do the single or two images wasn't worth it to set it up in Enscape if the deliverable I was getting was still better looking visually in AI Enhance. So I'm doing the shift right now where the last 8 years has been all like, okay, let me budget. If it takes me 4 hours to model, it takes me another 2 hours to set up settings in Enscape and then 2 hours of revision. Now it's 4 hours to render, or maybe less because I can prompt AI for specific things to build or to add to it. So yeah, it depends. And then for AI render, SketchUp's own tool, it saves it to Trimble Connect, which is Trimble's cloud account. I do not like Trimble Cloud, Trimble Connect, because I don't want it on a server. I want it all locally. So for privacy, I can't see, as a developer, I can't see what you render. So when you submit that to render and it comes back, this image automatically saves. It's just saving directly to this gallery. And in this gallery, it's just, you predefine where you want that folder to be. So this is just like saving to my documents. So it's just saving that sort of image, and it saves the before and after, so you have it as a reference. So that varies. Other tools like Architect Synth or MySynth, and those are all cloud-based ones. So you're saving them into the web browser. I wanted something I could keep inside of SketchUp because my world is all inside of SketchUp. So yeah. That's one way in which I'm trying to differentiate it from the other sort of tools. All right, thank you all. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. And yeah, happy summer. Take care.